if you look at like the EV example in China, there are hundreds of EV companies now. They were like 900 at a peak. And the ones that are surviving, they have super thin margins, and not all of them will survive the next 5 years. And that is something that is also like being played very well by both the Chinese government and the Chinese entrepreneur. Insane competition leads to very low margin, but also leads to a lot of learnings and a lot of progress. And we will see that for everything that they're tackling next. One other favorite-ish example of mine is high-speed rail. There again, you see the scale and the quickness. China went from zero high-speed rail to the largest high-speed rail network with over 40,000 kilometers of lines, and essentially connected all of their major cities already. Spent a month this year in China, and I only took high-speed rail, and it was quicker, more comfortable, and nicer than most planes ride I took in my life. I took a lot of like EV test drives because I wanted to test out the like newest cars, and not one of them mentioned that EVs are the greener choice or the more climate friendly choice. It was all about the features of the car, the touch screen, how long it can drive, the aircon, whatever. They were so like iPhones or the newest gadgets are being sold to us, right? All about features, all about how it improves your lives, very little about the overall climate impact of it all. All of these products just make sense because they make sense, not because they are like sense in a green world, right?
Hi, welcome to Off the Record Climate Edition. This is the podcast all about what's hot in climate tech and everything playing out behind the scenes. So for today's episode, we're going to be talking about China's climate tech domination. Now, Skander Garroum, my co-host, he thought he knew everything about how China was leading climate tech in terms of infrastructure, manufacturing, product offerings. And yet, on his recent trip to China, he was totally blown away to see their domination firsthand. Until you're on the ground, and until you get a chance to have access to seeing what they're developing, and until you experience what regular people in China see and do every day, you can't really imagine how far ahead they actually are. This always leads us back to the same question. What do we here in the West do now? Skander thinks he's got the answer. You're going to have to listen to find out. Now, in today's episode, we're going to cover 4 different topics. The first one, how did China become a complete powerhouse in climate tech, controlling virtually all the essential resources needed? Topic number 2, building really big. We're going to look at China's infrastructure build-out versus how we've approached things here in the West. Topic number 3, no one sells eco in China. They've got a much better approach. And number 4, what the West could and should do next in climate tech. And without further ado, let's jump right in. Hey everyone, I'm Jordy Gold.
Hi, and I'm Skander Garroum.
And welcome to Off the Record, the Climate Tech Edition. Skander, it seems like everyone is completely focused on China. We can't stop talking about them. What exactly is going on?
Yeah, China is top of mind for everyone. I think it's one of those like realization moments, right? Like a lot of people, their idea and their like mental map of China is stuck somewhere in the 80s and 90s, perhaps, right? Like China does furniture and they do like all these nice little electronic stuff, and perhaps you arrive at the point of like, yes, they're also producing like all these iPhones that we're buying, but it's obviously something vastly else if you understand that they literally own and control and supply us with everything that we need for the clean transition: batteries, solar, EVs.
So, in that case, they control everything. People are a bit mixed up. They have different ideas of what's going on. How exactly should how should we anyways be thinking about working with China?
I think the reality is somewhere between all these like simplified images that we have in our heads, right? Like, China is not always living in the future, and they're also always not living in the past. They do some things well. They are very much an engineering state. They are very good at building. They got very good at building through us outsourcing it. And they're very good at like ecosystem building and everything that's part of like this whole like, scaling up manufacturing process. But we could also just dive in some case studies and things that I've heard in the last few weeks.
Please do. Yeah. What have you heard?
So there's this ongoing debate about like onshoring and offshoring, but It gets interesting if you talk to specific companies in the supply chain and, trying to listen to what they have to say and what their experience is. I had a good conversation with Sharon Chen, who's a friend of mine, Western VC turned, China whisperer. She helps clean tech companies, climate companies set up their production lines in China. Just started a year ago and is now doing around 15 projects this year. And she told me a very interesting case study around a company that's like working in this, interestingly, in this battery onshoring field, right? So they tried to set up a battery supply chain in the West, and they needed a piece that was really important. They needed an electric oven, right? So like a large scale industrial electric oven. And they looked around. They originally only wanted to buy from the West. So they did the tour, right? Like they asked like European suppliers. European suppliers said, for this type of oven, it's $2 million and the lead time is 24 months, like from ordering till you have the oven. Then they asked around with US suppliers. They were cheaper, to be fair, and they were quicker, $1 million and 14 months. They also asked everywhere else, right? That's like, what we consider like friendly country. And like, for example, in Japan, they were fully ghosted, right? It's a new company. Japanese companies don't necessarily want to do business with new companies. So in the end, they also turned to China and said, okay, like what exists on the market there? An electric oven costs 400,000 and the lead time, including shipping, is 6 months, right? So from ordering to at the door.
That is fast, and that is very, very cheap. I don't know how you pass up on something like that. So obviously there's some advantages. There's some nice things that you have access to things like that if you're trading with China. I happen to be in Canada right now. It's where I live, and I know we've got at least one Canadian premier who's not happy with the current situation. We have tariffs that are on, I think, 100% tariffs on EVs coming in from China, or could come from China, something like that. They basically don't come. And so it has damaged trade relationships with various provinces here. So at least one premier wants our country to drop those tariffs so that they can sell more EVs and that they can sell more stuff to China and have a better relationship. So now, what else are you seeing along these kinds of lines?
So I'm having a lot of conversation with like founders building in the space and investors who are investing in Western companies trying to set everything up. And I think the example that Sharon gave before is a very like, you're a startup, you need to move fast, you need to build fast. Which option do you go with? And you will obviously go with the quicker, faster option, especially if the product is measuring up and or better. And the reason why all of this is very complicated, very short form, is because they already build up the supply chains, because they have, the whole ecosystem of suppliers, right? And like the question is now, they have all of this, they have all these capabilities, and they are willing and happy to deliver us these products. So how should we react? And then I think there's like 4-ish different reactions, right? Like reaction one is like under this decoupling narrative, they are doing a lot of things right. We should still try to decouple from them, but essentially we should copy paste everything over that they have, right? And that will not be immediate, but some are pushing that this can happen quicker than most people think is logical, because it also took China more than like 20 years to build everything up, and like billions and billions of dollars of investment and learnings, very obviously, right? And so the learnings is kind of like the other part. Like reaction number 2 is, we can't do these learnings by ourselves. We need to collaborate. We need to do the things that the Chinese did, 20 years ago, and we need to set up joint ventures. Chinese companies need to come here and they need to teach us how to, build battery supply chains, how to build like EV supply chains again, and like just like we need to build from scratch, which is just like this tribal learning knowledge on like how do you actually manufacture again, and then you have the decoupling reaction is like, no, we can do it by ourselves. We need to decouple and we need to build everything from scratch, and we can do it better and quicker. And that is like very big question mark there, because it's one of those camps that has a big vision, but no way to get there. And then you have reaction 4, which is, okay, China will always be able to outperform us on the manufacturing basis because they invested so much in it and we gave up so much of it. So we should just give up, right? Like we should obviously not give up on everything, but I know European investors now who have a blacklist of technologies that they are not investing in anymore because Chinese competition and products will just outperform anything that we could build in our like limited time frame over the next few years.
That is really interesting. I had no idea there's a blacklist or a group of technologies like that. That's a little surprising.
Yeah, it again goes back to global market and competition, and the vendor example I gave in the beginning on um, if the market currently looks like that, except we put up our like trade walls and 200% tariffs, because like 100% tariff for EVs is also not cutting it, right? Like already it's all priced in, essentially, is the meme already. They can work with 100% tariffs as long as they can still sell their things, right? So the core question again is like, where do you see yourself in this landscape? What is your vision of the future, and how do you personally want to engage?
Gotcha. And so, do you have a recommendation? Is there something that you think that people and countries and companies should be doing?
I, for once, believe that decisions don't necessarily exist in a vacuum, right? Like climate change also doesn't exist in a vacuum. Climate change is happening everywhere in the end. So we should not only be able to deploy solutions, but we should also be able to build them and adapt solutions to, where specifically are. Um, I mean, there's always like the point of like spinning a narrative positively. Protectionism might help us create our own supply chains that we wouldn't, for like purely capitalist reasons, create otherwise. So if we would have our own battery and EV supply chains, we could just plainly produce more EVs and batteries, and that would be very nice because we need much more of them and we need to deploy so much more. And the more we can create, the more we can sell, and the more flywheel finally happens. But I would prefer work where we all work together and we take the learnings that we have from each other and like, move forward.
Okay, so let's go on then to topic number 2. China is building really big things and they're doing it incredibly quickly. And for now, anyways, we're certainly not seeing anything like this in the West at all. And so it seems like it depends where you live in the world. It feels like very different things are possible. What's an example of one of these big things that China is building that's big and they're doing it fast right now?
If you look at state-driven things, I think nuclear is immediately super top of mind, right? So the first nuclear power plant went live in the UK in 56. The first Chinese one went live in the year I was born, 91. Um, aging myself here. And now, like, last year they reached the same number of nuclear power plants in China as in the US. So tremendous build out in very short time. And this is just getting quicker, right? Because right now, the US is building exactly one nuclear power plant and China is building 30 at the same time
Oh man.
for 1/10 of the price, because they kept building and they started building. And the more you build, learning curves, the cheaper things get.
Are there other examples or the difference, I guess, of what you're seeing in say Western Europe right now?
And one other favorite-ish example of mine is high-speed rail, because we're all very big believers in public shared transportation that is low carbon and quick and very comfortable. There, again, you see the scale and the quickness. Like, it's even quicker than the nuclear example, because in the last 15 years, China went from zero high-speed rail to the largest high-speed rail network with over 40,000 kilometers of lines, and essentially connected all of their major cities already with each other, with tremendous investment, tremendous progress and innovation. And now I spent a month this year in China, and I only took high-speed rail, and it was quicker, more comfortable, and nicer than most planes ride I took in my life.
Wow. So basically, people in China they can see big things are happening, big things are being built. They can imagine that they could build big things too. So why does this matter? And what exactly do we do with this in here in the West?
There's a lot of different archetypes, and we don't really have the time to go into like all these like little case studies. But on the one side, you always need a clear vision of where you want to head, right? Like China very obviously didn't come up with nuclear power plants, it didn't come up with high-speed rail. There was always a specific vision was triggered by an experience that the leader should have, and then and they defined this vision better, and then they went through the learning and investing process and the execution process of building everything out. And they had like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Obviously, they had all of their issues themselves too. It's not always like a super nice winning. Everything is easy in China. type story, right? So every manufacturing story, every creation story, and every big infrastructure build out is connected to a lot of friction and a lot of like very painful learnings. So the core of the issue then goes back to what kind of vision do we envision, and China is very forward with that, because they have something that is called a 5-year plan, with the technologies that they want to focus on and the goals that they have for the country overall. And this is less you need to produce 6 million EV cars by 2030. It's more not only top down, but also bottoms up, right? Like very often there's an existing trend. The trend fits in with the overall vision of the state. So the state goes back to the market and then lets the market define what should be goal sets, what kind of like enablement do we need, et cetera, et cetera. And then it is all being put into a clear, coherent strategy, and then they can execute the strategy. And like compare that to, the problems that we have in Germany, where, we have 4-year legislation periods, but of these 4 years, the first 1.5 are being spent on coalition. So like, defining the plans as a mix out of a lot of different voices. And then the last half year is again spent on election preparation. So we have like 2 years to execute a plan if you're a government, right? So this is a systematic issue. But, going back to the 5-year plan, this week was actually the week where the new 5-year plan that's starting next year was announced, and the focus there. So they're very, very clear on like what are they supporting and what they're seeing, and they're like communicating that. And we should look at that and also think about what do we want to support, what do we want to communicate, and where do we want to throw our like money and resources and systems behind.
We're talking earlier. I mean, I think you mentioned some examples I think that Sharon maybe experienced, who you mentioned earlier, and how quickly things were being built. She saw some stuff happening with Northvolt as well, our experience in seeing how that played out. Anything else to share on those?
Yeah, I think like Northvolt is a very good example of like the market in Europe finding one specific play and then putting a lot of money behind it. This is, by the way, also happening with Vargas, which was the company builder behind Northvolt. They're doing a very similar play, like in a sense to like the Chinese government, like define one vision, try to get a lot of resources behind it, and let's try to execute that vision. The difference there is like the market very strongly, because if you look at like the EV example in China, there are hundreds of EV companies now. They were like 900 at the peak, when it was clear that this is a big market and the government will support it. And then Chinese capitalism and competition drive took over, and then 900 companies were funded and started, and like obviously hundreds of them failed, right? And the ones that are surviving, and there are like around 100 EV manufacturers in China left right now. They have super thin margins, and not all of them will survive the next 5 years, right? And that is something that is also like being played very well by both the Chinese government and the Chinese entrepreneur. Insane competition leads to very low margin, but also leads to a lot of learnings and a lot of progress. And we will see that for everything that they're tackling next, right? Like they're tackling how can they build better factories with advanced manufacturing, with robotics, with AI. So that's very, very top of mind. Very top of mind for them is everything around drones, space, aviation, right? Like if you think aviation right now, you think Airbus in Europe, you think Boeing in the US, but there will be a Chinese brand fairly soon. They're continuing to build on everything that they've built and like what they consider new energy, right? Solar, battery, all the whole supply chain is still super important for them. And then they have some moonshots that they focus on, right? I already mentioned AI and the robotics part there, but they also have fusion on their list, and they have biomanufacturing on their list, and a lot of like fun little like future technologies.
Oh, curious to see what they come up with or come out with next. So let's move on to topic number 3. You told me earlier, we were having a conversation, and you said that everything in China is really about the product and the experience. And apparently, nothing is really about climate or avoiding climate change. So what exactly did you mean when you were talking about this?
Like I've got two good-ish examples here. Like
Okay.
one is I took a lot of like EV test drives because I wanted to test out the like newest cars, and not one of them mentioned that EVs are the greener choice or the more climate friendly choice. It was all about the features of the car, the touch screen, how long it can drive, the aircon, the video camera system, the connection to the phone, whatever. They were so like iPhones or the newest gadgets are being sold to us, right? All about features, all about how it improves your lives, very little about the overall climate impact of it all.
Okay.
So that's number one. All of these products just make sense because they make sense, not because they are make sense in a green world, right? So that's a very large difference, and like you can see this in the West too nowadays, that less and less climate companies are pitching that they're climate companies and focus on the green premium. So this is something that we can very strongly learn. Products need to survive by themselves in a hard competition without any green premium, because there's no green premium in China. And the other thing is focus on money, right? Like, Chinese investors and Chinese founders are there to make money, and you make money in EVs, right? Like you make monies in batteries and solar and the whole supply chain, because there's markets for that, and because the technology is superior and the products can be superior, right? And then so if it's all about making money and climate technologies are the technologies of the future, why not go hard at them and make money long term?
So do the Chinese and their companies care about climate at all? Is that important in any way or not really?
China has climate goals, and the Chinese are as human as we are. So they obviously also care about their nature, and they care about the world that they're living in. But the conversation and the focus is not so much on we are doing this for climate change. It's less idealistic in that sense, and it's more around, okay, like what are good products that we can build that are actually making the world a better place, but the world a better place as in make the buyers happy.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So this all keeps coming back to what should we do? Do we compete? Do we collaborate? And now here's the thing. We just a few weeks ago, we had this exact conversation. And it's just a couple of weeks later, and already we're seeing major shifts in this space. It's hard to stay on top of everything. So what else is happening?
It's a tit for tat, and day politics are insanely hard to understand and to follow, because everything changes every 2 hours essentially. So China just last time we talked on that, just put a export ban on battery manufacturing equipment, because the onshoring obviously also becomes a problem for them, especially if it's the beginning of an escalation, and a decoupling means that the products that they are producing will be harder sold in the West, and they need markets because they're, for their own market, overproducing. They're producing so much that is just there to be exported. So China needs cooperation as much as we also need cooperation, right? Because they see it as markets, and we see them as sources, right? So supply and demand essentially. So this is why this like tit for tat is also so hard to understand in the end, because it goes down to, we are already so interwoven and we are so dependent on each other that it's very hard to understand where is like a rational line to be cut off, and where does the irrationality start. And obviously the more we have irrational politicians who can just say one thing the one day and another thing the next day, it would be very hard to see where this is all going. If it's going in the direction of escalation, are we already in a cold trade war, or like are we going closer together? I heard all of these narratives in the last 3 days, and like I had data points, unfortunately, for all of those narratives, right? And then again, it goes back to the thing that we talked about in the beginning of like, where do you stand? Like not only as an individual, but like where do you stand as a company? Like, is your supply chain dependent on China? Probably, if you are a climate company in the last 20 years, right? And what do you do now? Like, do you decide to go China plus one? So like you keep your supply chain in China, but you add a more resilient supply chain in a friendlier country? Do you have the money for that? Like, that's another thing. There's obviously a lot of investments that you need to do, and it takes time. Like, it's not like buying on Amazon, right? You cannot like just stand up one morning and say, hey, I need a fully new supply chain. Let's just click and buy everything on the internet. It takes negotiations. You need to test out the product. You need to see if everything works, etc., etc. So it's an investment, and it's a time frame that you need to think about when you're going to do this investment.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider there. Well, I learned a ton. I didn't know half of that stuff. You always are so plugged in. You know what's going on in China. There's a lot of fun to have the conversation. Let's do this again soon.
Jordy, as always, great conversation, and we barely scratched any of the topics. Let's add some reading in the notes, and I'm pretty sure we will do a lot more explainer content on China, how we should work together, because they're part of our world and they're a very, very integral part of the climate world.
That makes a ton of sense. So if you liked what you heard, please do share the episode with your friends. Sign up for the Climate Drift newsletter. Make sure you subscribe, like it. Make sure you comment on the episode. Let us know what you're hearing. What things are you seeing? What's happening behind the scenes that we should know about? And we'll definitely be back soon with another episode. Like Skander said, there's a lot more to dig into. Thanks so much.
Looking forward to it.